those questions terrified me. Because if the answer was no, then what was I doing with my life? And if the answer was yes, then why did I feel so lost? I used to love my work. Truly. I used to get excited about campaigns, about strategy, about storytelling. But somewhere, along the way, that passion turned into pressure. Creativity turned into KPI stress. Connection turned into competition. And joy turned into just survival. The hardest part? No one knew. Because I was still performing, still showing up, still delivering results, still being the strong one. People looked at me and said, "You're so lucky." And I smiled. But inside, I felt like I was vanishing. There's a kind of loneliness that comes when you're surrounded by people, but feel unseen. When you're celebrated for a version of yourself that no longer exists. That's where I've been. And maybe that's where you are too. It's not that I'm ungrateful. I know I've been fortunate. I've had mentors, opportunities, a stable income, things many people long for. But, can I be honest? Gratitude and grief can exist in the same heart. I can be thankful for the life I built, and still mourn the parts of myself I lost along the way. I miss the version of me who used to dream wildly, who wanted to write, to travel, to create. I miss the version of me who laughed without guilt, who didn't measure her worth by productivity, who believed that happiness wasn't something you earned. It was something you chose. And I think what breaks me the most is realizing I gave so much of myself to become someone I'm not even sure I want to be anymore. So here I am, standing at a crossroads. I don't have the answers yet. I haven't figured out what's next. But I know this. I can't keep living a life that doesn't feel like mine. And maybe this moment, this tired, tearful, trembling moment, isn't a breakdown. Maybe it's a beginning. I wanted to share this, not because I have some inspirational ending, not because I've already made the leap, or because I know how to fix it, but because I think we need more spaces where people can say, "I'm not okay," without shame. Because this idea that we need to have everything figured out by 30 is a lie. This pressure to succeed, to settle down, to know who you are, it's crushing people. Quietly, invisibly, and I don't want to pretend anymore. If you're listening right now and something inside you whispers, "Yes, I know that feeling," then this story is for you. Not to give you answers, but to remind you, you are not alone. There is nothing wrong with you for wanting more. There is nothing weak about walking away from something that doesn't make your soul light up. And there is no shame in starting over. So this is me. Not the version you'd see in a polished resume or on a curated Instagram feed. This is me, Claire, 36, tired, questioning, but still hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we can build a life not just filled with achievement, but with meaning. And that starts, I think, with telling the truth. Even when it shakes. Even when it's messy. Even when we don't know what comes next. Thank you for listening. And if you're... So, how did I end up here? Sometimes I ask myself that exact question when I'm 3 coffees deep on a Monday morning, staring at another 45-slide presentation, wondering if this was really the plan all along. But the truth is, I didn't fall into this career. I ran toward it, fast, head first, with a bright, burning fire of ambition, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny dose of naivety. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a family where stability was the holy grail. My dad was an engineer. My mom was a teacher. Every dinner conversation circled back to job security, benefits, and having a good title. They weren't wrong. They wanted the best for me. But I was the kid who loved storytelling. I'd write short plays with dramatic plot twists and act them out with my teddy bears. I'd spend hours pretending I had my own radio show, using a hairbrush as my mic. Yes, there are embarrassing home videos to prove it. So naturally, when I told my parents I wanted to study creative writing, their faces froze. My dad blinked slowly and said, "What about business?" And thus, the first compromise of adulthood was born. To be fair, marketing seemed like a perfect middle ground. It was creative, in a corporate-approved kind of way. I could write, strategize, play with ideas, but still get paid and maybe even wear blazers with confidence one day. I went to college and majored in marketing, and honestly, I thrived. I was the girl who color-coded her planner. I loved group projects. I volunteered for every leadership role. Okay, maybe I was a little too into PowerPoint design. There was something intoxicating about building brands, pitching ideas, and watching a simple concept turn into something real. It felt like magic. And back then, I truly believed I'd found my calling. After graduation, I landed a job at a mid-size agency. I still remember the day I got the offer. I screamed into a pillow and called my mom. I was so proud, so ready, so clueless. That first year was a blur of 12-hour workdays, endless brainstorms, and learning to smile through client revisions like, "Can we make the logo pop more? What does that even mean?" But I didn't mind. I was in the game. I was building something. I was doing big things. There were moments that lit me up, seeing my first campaign on a billboard, leading my first presentation, staying up late with my team eating pizza and laughing while editing videos. And those moments mattered. They still do. But looking back, now, I can also see how the hustle started to seep into my identity. I wasn't Claire, the person anymore. I became Claire, the marketer. Claire, the high performer. Claire, who always says yes. I didn't question it. Not at first. I was being praised, promoted, and paid. I was the one people pointed to and said, "She's got it all figured out." But here's the part they didn't see. I wasn't choosing anymore. I was just continuing. Continuing because it made sense. Continuing because it made my parents proud. Continuing because stopping felt like failure. Somewhere along the way, what started as curiosity turned into obligation. And I kept thinking, this is just a phase. Things will slow down, I'll feel passionate again. But years passed, and that spark never really returned. Still, I kept moving. From agency to in-house, from junior to senior roles. The meetings got fancier, the stakes got higher. I started flying for work, managing teams, leading quarterly reviews. And every now and then, I'd hear that little voice inside me whisper, "Is this really you?" And I'd whisper back, "Not now. I'm busy." It's funny how we silence our own souls with busyness. Looking back, I can laugh at some of it. Like the time I pitched a rebranding concept with metaphorical flamingos, and the client said, "We sell real estate. Why are there birds?" Or the time I accidentally sent an internal joke meme to an entire company mailing list, including the CEO. Yes, I survived. Barely. But underneath the funny stories and the work victories, there was this growing disconnect between who I was and who I pretended to be from 9 to 5. I didn't choose this career because I didn't have options. I chose it because I believed it could hold all the parts of me I loved. Creativity, strategy, storytelling, connection. And in many ways it did, in the beginning. But over time, the pressures changed the picture. The deadlines, the deliverables, the metrics, they took center stage. And I forgot why I started. I forgot the girl with the hairbrush mic. The one who wanted to move hearts, not just move products. So how did I get here? I chose this path for the right reasons, but I stayed on it for the wrong ones, and I think that's okay to admit. Because life isn't always about perfect choices. Sometimes it's about recognizing when the choice no longer fits. Now, when people ask what I do, I hesitate. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I know I'm not just my job anymore. I'm a woman learning to ask bigger questions. A woman trying to find her way back to joy, to purpose, to herself. And maybe that's the most important job of all. When I think about how I ended up in this career, I can't help but smile a little. Not because it's a perfect story, but because it's a very human one. One filled with passion, assumptions, surprises, and of course, a bit of chaos. Let's rewind. I was 21, just out of university, bright-eyed, full of caffeine, and ready to take on the world. I had just graduated with a degree in marketing. I was the girl who believed that a good campaign could change lives. That storytelling could sell not just products, but emotions, meaning, identity. Looking back now, it all sounds a little too idealistic. But at the time, it was everything. I remember landing my first job at a boutique marketing agency in the city. The office was small but colorful, filled with inspirational quotes on the walls and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I felt like I'd just stepped into an episode of some quirky workplace sitcom. Everyone was talking about brand voices and touch points and using phrases like circle back before lunch. It was thrilling. It was fast-paced. It was chaotic. And I loved every minute of it. In those early years, I was hungry. Hungry to prove myself. Hungry to climb. Hungry to create something that made people stop and feel something. I'd come in early, stay late, take on extra work just to be seen. I was that employee who color-coded reports, volunteered to present at meetings, and stayed up until 1 a.m. designing pitch decks. Just for fun. Yes, I thought PowerPoint was fun. Judge me gently. And, you know what? All that energy, it paid off. In less than 2 years, I got promoted. My salary doubled before I turned 25. My manager called me a future leader, and soon I was leading projects and clients twice my age. I was on fire. I felt powerful, accomplished, even invincible at times. There's something magical about your first taste of success. It's like falling in love. Everything feels possible. Every challenge is exciting. Every late night is worth it. I remember presenting my first solo campaign to a big client. I was nervous, hands shaking, voice tight. But as I spoke, I felt something click. The client smiled, nodded, clapped even. That night, I went home and cried, not from stress, but from joy. I felt seen, capable. I thought to myself, I'm really doing it. There were other moments too. Winning an industry award at 27. Being sent abroad for a big project in Singapore. Being invited to speak on a panel about women in leadership. Even though I still felt like a girl borrowing her mother's heels, every achievement made me believe I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And don't get me wrong, those achievements mattered. They gave me confidence, gave me a seat at the table. And for a while, that was enough. More than enough, really. But behind that shiny exterior, There were little cracks, ones I ignored at first. Because how could I complain when things were going so well? Like the way I stopped writing for fun. The way I flinched every time I got a Slack message after 9 p.m. The way I felt a strange hollowness even during celebrations, like something important was missing but I couldn't name it yet. But I brushed it all aside, because I was still winning. And when you're winning, people expect you to keep running. Faster. Farther. Always forward. Looking back now, I realized something important. I didn't just love my work. I tied my worth to it. When things were good, I felt good. When I succeeded, I felt lovable. I wore my career like a badge, like proof that I was enough. And maybe that's not unusual. We live in a world that teaches us to equate success with identity. Your job title becomes your introduction. Your salary becomes your scorecard. Your hustle becomes your personality. And I played along because I was winning the game. Until the game started to change. But that's a story for the next chapter. For now, what I want you to know is this. I chose this career with heart. I entered it with fire. And for a long time, it gave me everything I thought I wanted. Achievement, recognition, purpose. I was proud of myself. I was living the version of success I had imagined as a young girl in a graduation cap, full of dreams. But sometimes, the dreams we chase in our 20s don't look quite the same in our 30s. And it's okay to admit that. It doesn't erase the past. It just opens the door for something new. So if you're someone who once loved what you do, but now feel a shift you can't explain, know this. You're not broken. You're just evolving. And that evolution, it might just lead you home. It didn't happen all at once. Burnout doesn't arrive like a storm. It creeps in like a fog, soft, quiet, almost invisible. At first, it was just a little tiredness. Nothing unusual. After all, who isn't tired after a long day at work? Who doesn't crash into bed still thinking about tomorrow's meeting or that email you forgot to reply to? Everyone feels this way, I told myself. It's just part of being an adult. But slowly, the tiredness became something else. Not just physical fatigue, but a deep, persistent weariness that even sleep couldn't cure. I began waking up already exhausted, like my body was moving but my soul hadn't caught up. And still, I showed up. I smiled in meetings. I delivered results. Because that's what high performers do, right? You keep going. You keep pushing. You keep achieving. But somewhere in the middle of all the doing, I stopped feeling. There used to be pride. Every big presentation, every win, every milestone. I used to walk out of the office with a rush of energy, texting my best friend, "We nailed it." But now, even when things went well, I felt nothing. Numb, detached, as if I was watching my own life from behind a glass wall. The KPIs were being hit. The reports were glowing. My boss called me indispensable. And yet, I'd sit at my desk and think, is this it? Is this what I worked so hard for? Because somewhere along the way, the spark was gone. And no one noticed. Not even me at first. I remember one night, sitting alone in the office. It was past 10. The lights on the other floors were off. The silence was deafening. I looked at the endless rows of spreadsheets and drafts and felt this sudden wave of sadness. Not for anything specific, just a quiet ache, a question echoing inside me. What am I doing with my life? I had once believed I was building something meaningful. Now, I felt like I was just checking boxes, meeting deadlines, performing. I wasn't creating. I was executing. I wasn't growing. I was maintaining. I wasn't living. I was enduring. And then came the loneliness, the strange kind, the kind where you're surrounded by people, laughing in the break room, chatting about weekend plans, and yet you feel like a ghost, present, but invisible. There was a time I felt so connected to my team. We were in it together. Now every "how are you" felt like a performance. Every "I'm fine" was a small betrayal. I didn't know how to say, "I'm not okay." I didn't want to be the one who crumbled. So I put on my armor, the smile, the can-do attitude, the endless energy. But inside, I was cracking. Even the things I loved outside of work began to fade. Books I used to devour sat untouched. Music became background noise. Weekends, once sacred, became recovery time. And slowly, my world shrank. I canceled plans more often. "I'm just tired," I'd say. And I was. But it was more than that. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to pretend. I just wanted quiet. And yet, even in the quiet, my mind buzzed. With guilt, with deadlines, with a question I couldn't shake. If I'm so successful, why am I so empty? I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was doing all the things I was supposed to do. But I couldn't feel the joy, the pride, the connection. My job had once been a source of identity. Now it felt like a cage. I kept waiting for something to change. A new role, a new team, a new challenge. But the truth was, nothing outside could fix what was unraveling inside. I was burned out. Not just from work, but from the pressure to always be on, to perform, to achieve, to prove. And worst of all, no one knew. Because I didn't let them. Because even in my exhaustion, I was still trying to be strong. But there's a kind of strength and softness too. In honesty. In saying, "I'm not okay." It took me a long time to learn that, and I'm still learning. But in that quiet, painful season, I began to realize something. Maybe success isn't about how much you can carry. Maybe it's about knowing when to put things down. And maybe the bravest thing I ever did was admit I wanted something more, something slower, something softer, something that felt like me again. Part 4. The Invisible Pressures of Being 30+. Tone. Honest, raw, relatable. You know what no one really tells you about turning 30? That it comes with 1,000 invisible weights. They aren't heavy in the beginning. But they accumulate, like financial pressure. Maybe it's the mortgage, or student loans that still haven't disappeared, or saving for a wedding, a baby, a car, a future. You're no longer just working for a paycheck. You're trying to build a life. And that life? It comes with a price tag. There are days I look at my bank account and think, I make good money. So why am I still worried at the end of every month? Maybe it's because being financially successful in your 30s means something different now. It's not just about earning well. It's about being able to provide, invest, save, support. And in trying to juggle all those, sometimes I forget to breathe. Then there's the pressure of comparison. She just became the youngest director at her company. He started his own business, and it's booming. They just bought a house by the lake. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there, reheating last night's leftovers, wondering if I'm falling behind. It's irrational, I know. We're all on different timelines. But logic doesn't silence that tiny voice whispering, "You should have done more by now." And it's not just career, it's relationships, it's parenting, it's health, it's the shape of your body, the car you drive, the vacations you do or don't take, everything becomes a scoreboard. And even if no one else is keeping score, I am. There's also the expectation to have it all together. By 30 plus, shouldn't you know what you want? Shouldn't you be settled? Why are you still doubting yourself? Still unsure? Still figuring it out? The world doesn't leave much space for uncertainty at this age. But the truth? I've never felt more uncertain. Not because I'm lost, but because I'm finally seeing the cost of every choice. And that kind of awareness, it's overwhelming. Sometimes I wonder, is this just what being an adult is? Carrying silent fears while smiling in photos? The world applauds your milestones, but no one sees the panic attacks you hide. Or the nights you stay up calculating what ifs. There are days I feel strong, capable, driven. And then there are days I just want to disappear under a blanket and not be anyone's anything. And I think that's okay, because we weren't meant to carry all this alone. We weren't meant to pretend we're always okay. The pressure of 30 plus is real. But maybe, just maybe, we can start being real too. With ourselves. With each other. Maybe it's time we stop asking, why am I behind? And start asking, what do I really want? Because this decade isn't just about proving we're successful. Maybe it's about redefining what success even means. About the big milestones of adulthood, graduating, landing a job, getting married, buying a house, but they never really talk about the weight that comes with it, especially after you hit your 30s. It's like someone quietly handed you a backpack full of invisible expectations, and every year they add a few more bricks. Financial pressure, that's the first one. Maybe when we were younger, money felt like freedom. Now, it feels like obligation. There's the rent or mortgage, car payments, utilities, insurance, groceries, and if you have kids, don't even get me started. School fees, medical bills, childcare, saving for their future. And all the while, you're supposed to be saving for your own retirement too. How ironic is that? Sometimes I sit there staring at my bank app thinking, I have a decent salary. Why does it still feel like I'm drowning? And that leads to the quiet comparison game. You know what I mean. You open Instagram or go to a reunion and suddenly you're hit with a wave of success stories. That girl you went to college with? She just bought her second home and is now VP at her company. Your old classmate? Traveling through Europe with their perfect partner and 2 perfectly photogenic children? And you? You're just trying to figure out if you can afford a weekend off without feeling guilty. It's not jealousy. Not really. It's more like panic. Like you're stuck in a race you didn't know you entered, and somehow everyone else is ahead. There's this voice in your head that says, she's already a director. He started his own company. What have you done? You try to silence it with logic. We all have different paths. But sometimes, logic doesn't stand a chance against the pressure of expectations, your own and everyone else's. Then there's the societal script we're all supposed to follow. By 30, you should have your career figured out. A partner. A kid or 2. A home. A 5-year plan. And if you don't, there's this quiet shame. People start asking those loaded questions. So when are you settling down? Still figuring things out? Don't you want kids soon? Sometimes it feels like your life isn't measured by your happiness, but by checkboxes. And if you're missing one, you're behind. But behind what? Whose timeline are we even following? The pressure isn't always loud. It doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it's our own expectations that hurt the most. I remember telling myself, by 35, I'll be a senior manager, married, maybe with a baby. owning my own place. And now, some of those things happened. Some didn't. But even the ones that did, they didn't feel as fulfilling as I thought they would. Because the truth is, the pressure doesn't stop once you get what you thought you wanted. It just shifts. Got the job? Now prove you deserve it. Have the house? Now make sure you don't lose it. Married? Now keep it together while juggling everything else. No one tells you how exhausting it is to have it all, or how lonely it can be, especially when you don't feel like you can say it out loud. We're all trying so hard to seem put together. We post our wins, smile through the struggle, and keep the breakdowns private. But the truth is, many of us are quietly asking, is it just me? Am I the only one who feels like this? You're not. We're all carrying silent pressures, comparing, doubting, trying, failing, pretending. But maybe we don't have to. Maybe part of growing up is learning that it's okay to not have it all figured out. That it's okay to feel overwhelmed. That it's okay to pause, breathe, and admit that the pressure is real and that you're doing your best. And maybe, just maybe, your best is enough. You know what no one really prepares you for? The quiet war inside your head once you hit your 30s. It's not just about paying the bills or managing deadlines anymore. It's about this constant low hum of pressure you carry with you every single day. So subtle, yet so heavy. One of the biggest weights? The fear of failure. And not just any failure. The kind that feels like public humiliation. The kind where people look at you and think, wow, she gave up. Or, he couldn't handle it. The older I get, the more afraid I am of making the wrong move, of walking away from something stable, even if it's draining the life out of me, because the thought of starting over, it terrifies me. At this age, failure doesn't feel like a stepping stone. It feels like shame. It's ironic, really. In my 20s, I was bold, even reckless. I tried things. I changed jobs. I took risks. I thought, it's okay, I'm still young. But now, every decision feels like it comes with a price tag I might not be able to afford. And that fear isn't just mine. It's echoed in the voices of people around me, especially the ones who love me the most. Your job is stable. Why rock the boat? You're lucky to have what you have. People would kill for your position. Don't be foolish. They mean well. I know they do. They just want to see me safe, secure. But sometimes that kind of love can feel like a cage, because their idea of success doesn't always match my idea of happiness. And when you're already unsure of your own path, having your fears mirrored in the eyes of your family or partner, it makes it even harder to trust yourself. So you stay. You stay in a job that doesn't light you up anymore. You keep quiet about your dreams of something else. You pretend you're okay, because explaining why you're not okay would take more energy than you have. And deep down, a question starts to grow in your mind. What if they're right? What if it's too late for me? I hear this phrase in my head more than I'd like to admit. You're not 25 anymore. It sounds simple, but it cuts deep. Because when you're in your 30s, there's this sneaky narrative society whispers to you, you should have figured it out by now. People your age are already settled. Reinventing yourself, that's for younger people. And so begins the spiral. I'm too old to change careers. No one's going to hire someone starting fresh at my age. Everyone else is ahead. Why am I still stuck? That's the heartbreaking part. How easy it is to convince yourself that you've missed your chance. That you should just keep going, even if you're going nowhere meaningful. But let me say this clearly, for anyone who needs to hear it. Just because your path looks different doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because you're tired doesn't mean you've failed. And just because you're 30, or 35, or even 40, doesn't mean you can't begin again. We don't talk enough about the courage it takes to admit that what once made sense no longer does. The courage it takes to say, I thought this was what I wanted, but now I'm not sure. I built a life that looks good on paper, but I feel numb inside. I want something else, and that doesn't make me selfish. It makes me human. We glorify the 20-something dreamers, but forget the quiet bravery of the 30-something soul who's questioning everything, and still gets up every morning to try again. So if you're sitting there right now, at your desk, in your car, on your lunch break, wondering if it's too late for a new beginning, it's not. Your story didn't end when you turned 30. In fact, it might just be starting. It was late. Too late. I sat in front of my laptop, staring at a never-ending list of deadlines and tasks that seemed to multiply every time I took a breath. The screen flickered under the harsh light of my desk lamp, and I felt my eyes growing, heavier, but my mind wouldn't stop. I kept scrolling, checking emails, fixing reports, pushing myself to finish, to get ahead, to just get it done. But something was wrong. Something inside of me felt like it was breaking. I couldn't pinpoint it at first, not in the way you expect. It wasn't like an obvious breakdown or meltdown. It was quieter, more insidious. I was slipping into a routine where the pressure of work had become so overwhelming that I didn't know where it stopped, and I began. The clock ticked on, and the weight of exhaustion sank deeper into my bones. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting. I thought about my daughter, about how long it had been since I'd had a real conversation with her, about the last time I genuinely smiled and felt present. It was like a distant memory now, one that faded further every day I spent drowning in my work. And then, it happened. It wasn't some dramatic event. It wasn't a crisis. But it was a quiet, piercing moment that hit me like a wave. My daughter, barely 6 years old, came into the room, her small feet padding softly on the carpet. She must have been up for a while, but I hadn't noticed her approach. "Mama?" she asked in her innocent voice. Her eyes were big and round, searching mine, filled with curiosity, but also something else. Concern. "Mama, why do you look so sad? Why do you always look so tired?" The words hit me harder than I could have imagined. I stared at her, my heart stopping for a second. I tried to smile, to brush it off, but it didn't come out right. I wanted to tell her that it was nothing, that everything was fine, but I couldn't. I couldn't lie to her. Not this time. She stood there, a little more hesitant than before, waiting for an answer I couldn't provide. I wanted to say something reassuring, to tell her that everything would be okay, that this was just temporary. But how could I, when I wasn't even sure myself? How could I say those words when I didn't believe them? At that moment, I felt like I was staring at the reflection of everything I had sacrificed, everything I had neglected. My daughter, my family, my own well-being. All for what? For what purpose? To climb a career ladder that didn't even feel like my own? To chase after deadlines that felt increasingly meaningless? To push through the exhaustion, the disconnection, the numbness? Tears welled up in my eyes, and I quickly turned away, not wanting her to see. I didn't want her to know how lost I was, how utterly exhausted I had become, how much I had been pretending that I had everything under control when, in fact, I was barely holding on. But in that moment, something inside of me clicked. The weight of it all, the endless demands of work, the pressure to perform, the feeling of constantly failing to be everything to everyone, finally broke through. I realized that I had been running for so long, but I had never stopped to ask myself why. Why was I doing this? What had I been chasing? For who? And the most difficult question of all, at what cost? It wasn't just the sleepless nights, the endless deadlines, or the work that never seemed to end. It was the fact that I had lost touch with the things that really mattered, the things that made me feel human, alive, and connected. I had forgotten how to simply be with my daughter. I had forgotten how to savor the small, precious moments of life. That night, as I sat there in the dim light of my room, I realized that something had to change. I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep pretending. For my daughter's sake, for my own sake, I needed to stop. I needed to take a step back and reevaluate everything. My work, my priorities, and most importantly, myself. But it wasn't going to be easy. The pressure to keep going, to keep up appearances, to maintain the status quo was immense. I knew that walking away from this path, from everything I had built so far, would feel like a risk, a huge one. It was so tempting to ignore the inner voice telling me to stop, to keep pushing through the exhaustion. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had been giving everything to a career that wasn't feeding my soul. I had been sacrificing my health, my family, and my happiness in the name of success. But what was success, really? Was it a title, a paycheck? Or was it living a life that brought joy, peace, and fulfillment? The answer was clear. I needed to stop. I needed to reclaim myself. And as I looked into my daughter's eyes, her innocent, trusting eyes, I realized that I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for her, too. I wanted her to see a mother who was present, who was happy, who didn't sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of others. I wanted her to learn that it was okay to step away from something that no longer served you, that it was okay to make a change, to start over, if that's what you needed. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer allow fear to dictate my life. I would no longer let the pressure of work consume me. I would choose to live. I would choose happiness. And though the road ahead would be uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. It was the only way. It was during a rare, unexpected reunion with an old friend that everything truly began to change. I hadn't seen Claire in years. She was one of those friends you meet in the early years of adulthood, back when life still felt full of possibilities, and we were both chasing dreams. The last time I saw her, we were sitting at a cafe, making plans that now seemed like remnants of a distant past. We spoke about our goals, our futures, how we envisioned ourselves thriving in the world. Claire had always been a little different. She was the type to follow her own path, even if it meant stepping away from the beaten track. And she had done just that, leaving behind her corporate job to follow a passion she had long ignored. She had taken a risk, one I couldn't fathom at the time. She became a photographer, traveling the world, capturing moments of life in places I could only dream of. She had traded a stable job, a predictable future for uncertainty, but the freedom and joy that radiated from her told a story of its own. That afternoon, when we sat together in a cozy cafe, catching up on life, I couldn't help but notice how different she looked. Not in appearance, but in her presence. She was glowing, alive, content, and genuinely happy. The smile on her face wasn't forced, nor was it the polite smile people give when they feel obligated. It was the kind of smile that came from a deep place inside, the kind you only see when someone is living authentically. As we chatted, she told me how much her life had changed. She spoke of the uncertainty she had faced when leaving her corporate career, the fears she had to overcome. But she also spoke of the joy of rediscovering herself, of finally doing something she loved every day. Her words were full of passion, of fulfillment, and that energy was contagious. It sparked something inside me that I hadn't felt in years, the desire to live again. But then, she said something that struck me like a lightning bolt. I can't imagine going back to that. Life, she said, sipping her coffee with a soft laugh. It was comfortable, sure, but I wasn't living. I was just existing. I realized one day that I wasn't being myself anymore. Those words echoed in my head long after I left the cafe. As I sat in the quiet of my car, my mind raced, processing everything she had said. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I had made my choices, that I had responsibilities, that I couldn't afford to make drastic changes. But I couldn't ignore the growing unease in my chest, that feeling of being stuck in a life that didn't feel mine anymore. It wasn't just about work. It was about who I had become in the process of doing it. Somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of myself. A few days later, I decided to take a break. I needed some space. Space to think, to breathe, to reconnect with the parts of myself I had buried under deadlines and expectations. I booked a solo trip, hoping that a change of scenery would help clear my mind. The trip itself was beautiful. I visited a small coastal town, far from the hustle of my everyday life. The sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore was calming, but as I walked along the beach, I found myself in a state of quiet reflection. There was something about being so far away from everything that allowed me to see myself clearly, something I hadn't done in years. I stood in front of the mirror one evening in the small hotel room, staring at my reflection. It was a fleeting moment, just a quick glance, but it felt like a revelation. I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. The tired eyes, the forced smile, the worn expression. It wasn't me. It was like I was looking at a stranger who had taken over. My body, the woman in the mirror, had been so consumed by work, by the expectations of others, that she had forgotten how to live authentically. The realization hit me harder than anything I had felt before. I had been living for everyone else, meeting the demands, checking off the boxes. But I hadn't been living for myself. I wasn't me anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, a wave of clarity washed over me. The truth was simple but profound. I couldn't keep living like this. I didn't want to be that person anymore. The person who had lost touch with herself, who had allowed work and responsibility to define her entire existence. I didn't want to look back at my life years from now and regret not having taken the leap when I had the chance. I thought of Claire again, the freedom in her eyes, the joy in her voice. She had made a choice, a bold one, and it had paid off. She had chosen herself. I needed to make that choice too. I can't keep living a life that doesn't belong to me. I whispered to myself in the quiet of the room, as if finally saying the words aloud made them real. It felt like a declaration, a turning point. The weight that had been on my chest began to lift. I realized that the only way to reclaim my life, to feel whole again, was to stop running. I needed to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't, for the sake of appearances, for the sake of meeting others' expectations. The decision wasn't easy. In fact, it was terrifying. But at that moment, I knew what I had to do. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. It would be A life that I chose. A life where I could rediscover my passions, my joy. I can't lie. The past few months have been difficult. And by difficult, I mean a constant internal tug of war. On one side, there's that little voice that says, maybe I should just stick it out. Keep going. Hold on a little longer. This is what adulthood looks like, right? But on the other side, there's a louder voice. A voice I can't ignore anymore, screaming, you're drowning. You can't keep going like this. You're not living, you're surviving. I had a moment, one quiet afternoon, when I sat down with my coffee, staring at the screen, and realized how much I'd been holding my breath. My body ached from stress, my mind constantly racing, and there was this nagging feeling that I wasn't where I was supposed to be anymore, and that's when the thought hit me. What if I left? What if I quit this job? What if I switched careers? What if I stepped off the path I've been on for so long and started over? The idea felt terrifying, but also exhilarating. I felt both scared and free, a strange mix of emotions. And that was the first time I started to think seriously about it. What if I walked away? What would that mean? What would I lose? What would I gain? Would it be a failure? Or would it be an opportunity for change? It was a decision that weighed on me for days. Every time I picked up my phone, I looked at my emails, my to-do list, and the endless cycle of expectations. I felt stuck, trapped in a loop of deadlines, meetings, and the endless chase for success that didn't even feel like my success anymore. But if I stayed, what was I really staying for? The money? The stability? The comfort of knowing what tomorrow would look like? Or was I just staying because I was too afraid to let go of something that was familiar, even though it no longer made me happy? I made a list. I'm a practical person. Always have been. And if I'm going to make a life-changing decision, I need to see it clearly. My list of values. I wrote down what mattered most to me. Deep down, beyond the titles, the paycheck, the social approval, freedom. The freedom to wake up excited about what I do. The freedom to have time for myself, my family, and the things I love. The freedom to explore new paths without fear. Passion. To feel a spark again. To be truly passionate about my work, not just good at it or effective. I want to feel like I'm contributing something that resonates with me on a deeper level. Balance. The ability to have a life outside of work. To be able to say no to burnout, to prioritize my well-being, and to actually enjoy the moments I'm working for. Growth. I want to keep evolving, not just in terms of my career, but as a person. I don't want to feel stagnant like I'm stuck in a loop of repetition. I want to be challenged, to learn new things, and to embrace change. Authenticity. I want to do something that feels me. No more pretending. No more wearing a mask. I want to feel aligned with my values, my desires, and who I really am. Not who I'm expected to be. It was eye-opening. Looking at the list, I realized that the life I had been living, the one I was holding on to so tightly, wasn't giving me any of these things. Yes, I had financial stability, but it wasn't enough anymore. I had the security of my job, but it didn't bring me joy. I was stuck in a career that didn't fuel my passion or align with my core values. It was just safe, and that realization hit hard. For the first time, I stopped and asked myself, what do I really want? Not what my family wants for me. Not what society expects from me. What I want. I realized that I had to decide. Stay and live in a shell of the life I once dreamed of? Or take a leap of faith and create a new life? One that would bring me joy, growth, and balance. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living the same way. The decision. It wasn't easy, and I didn't rush it. But I started making plans, small steps. First, I updated my resume. I reached out to mentors for advice. I started researching career paths that would excite me. I explored different industries, different roles, different ways of working. I looked into starting my own business, and I thought about going back to school for something entirely new. Every step felt like a little bit of freedom. Every step was one toward a life that felt more like me. And as I took those steps, I realized something important. No one can ever guarantee that any decision will be perfect. But the choice to live authentically, to pursue what you value, is the most empowering decision you can make. The fear is real. The doubts are natural. But what's more terrifying than failure, I realized, is never trying. Never taking that leap. Never making a change when you know deep down that it's the right thing to do. So, here I am. Not quite at the finish line. But I've taken the first step, and it feels like I'm finally heading in the right direction. I don't know where this journey will take me, but I'm finally starting to feel alive again, and that's something worth fighting. The days blurred into one another as I sat in front of my computer, feeling the weight of the decision that was steadily creeping into my mind. It was as if I were at a crossroads, unsure which direction to take. Should I stay on the familiar path, the one that everyone expected me to follow? Or should I dare to venture into the unknown, to change everything? I began to search for options. It wasn't just a matter of quitting my job. It was about finding something else, something that made my heart beat faster. The thought of switching careers was terrifying, but it was also the only thing that brought a spark of excitement to my life. I decided to explore. First, I dove into online learning. I signed up for courses, small ones at first, just to get a feel for something new. I wasn't sure where this would lead, but the feeling of learning again, the kind of learning that wasn't for a promotion or an evaluation, but purely for my own curiosity, was liberating. At first, I was afraid. What if I wasn't good enough for a new field? What if I couldn't learn fast enough? But then, I realized something. What do I have to lose? The idea of losing everything I had built over the years started to feel less important when compared to the idea of losing myself. I had become so absorbed in my job, my routine, and the demands of others that I had lost sight of who I was and what I wanted from life. It was suffocating, and I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. The stakes felt too high. I started networking with people who had made the leap I was considering. I reached out to individuals in different industries, asked questions, listened to their stories, and learned from their experiences. I began to see how many people had made bold choices in their lives, and how fulfilling those choices had been. They had stepped out of their comfort zones, embraced change, and found success in places they never expected. And most importantly, they were happy. The more I learned, the more I felt a sense of possibility. I didn't have to stay trapped in the world I had built. There was so much more out there for me to discover. And yet, the decision still loomed over me. What if it didn't work out? What if I failed? But as those questions circled in my mind, I realized something. Failure wasn't the worst outcome. The worst outcome would be staying stuck in a place where I felt dead inside. The worst outcome would be never trying. Never. Asking myself, what if I could be more? What if I could feel alive again? I spent days debating, going back and forth. On one hand, I had the security and stability of my current job. On the other, I had the fear of the unknown. What if I left and couldn't find something better? What if I wasted time and resources? But then, there was the undeniable truth that kept whispering in my mind. I needed to feel alive again. I needed to wake up in the morning with excitement. I needed to be passionate about what I did. I needed the courage to take the leap, even if I wasn't sure where I'd land. I took a deep breath and began to look at my options more clearly. I didn't have to quit everything overnight. I could take small steps, learning, networking, exploring new career paths. I could begin laying the foundation for something different, something that made me feel whole again. It wasn't going to be easy. In fact, it was going to be hard. But I realized that the hardest part was not making the change. It was realizing that I had the power to choose. I had the power to choose myself. And in that moment, I made the decision. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment where everything became clear. It was quiet, but it was profound. I chose myself. I chose the path that felt true to me, even if it meant taking a leap into the unknown. I chose to stop living for other people's expectations. I chose to stop sacrificing my happiness in the name of stability. I chose to believe that I deserved to be fulfilled, to feel passionate, and to live in alignment with my values. It wasn't a decision made lightly, but once I made it, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't sure what the future held. I didn't know where this new journey would take me. But I knew one thing for sure. It was going to be mine. And that, finally, felt like it was one of the most uncertain, frightening times of my life. When I first stepped out of the circle, everything felt like a blur, like I had jumped into the unknown without a safety net. There was a part of me that was relieved, but there was another, louder voice that questioned everything. What have I done? I thought. Am I completely out of my mind? I had made the leap. I had left my steady job, my stable routine, and all the familiar faces behind. But what I hadn't anticipated was how jarring the silence would be. The days stretched on, empty, filled with uncertainty. There was no longer the comforting hum of the office, no more structured workdays to tell me exactly what to do. It felt like everything had come to a screeching halt. I couldn't remember the last time I had to make so many decisions for myself, with no one else dictating the rules. The hardest part? No income. It's funny how quickly the absence of a paycheck can make you question every decision you've ever made. There were days when I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't have a clear roadmap of where I was going, and my savings, though comfortable at first, began to feel like a ticking clock, reminding me of the inevitable. Eventually, I'd run out. But amidst all the fear and doubt, something unexpected happened. The fear of what I had left behind was slowly replaced by a more subtle, yet powerful feeling. The feeling that I was finally free from the invisible chains that had held me captive for so long. It wasn't immediate, and it didn't come in one grand epiphany. It was small steps, one day at a time. At first, it was terrifying to not have that predictable rhythm of work. But in the silence, I started to listen to myself. I took that time to reflect on the things I had buried under stress and deadlines. It wasn't just about finding a new job. It was about rediscovering who I was and what I truly wanted in life. It was about learning to trust myself again. The first few months were filled with uncertainty, but also incredible discovery. I began to learn new skills that I had always wanted to develop but never had the time for. I started taking online courses, experimenting with things I was passionate about, but had pushed aside for years. Writing, photography, digital, marketing. These were the things I had once loved but had abandoned when life demanded I follow a more practical path. I realized that I had been so focused on pleasing others, fulfilling expectations, that I had forgotten what made me feel alive. The first skill I acquired was something I never thought I'd pursue: graphic design. At first, it seemed like an impossible task, too technical, too complicated for someone who had spent most of her career in the corporate world. But I dove in head first. I practiced day and night, watching tutorials, experimenting with design software, and slowly building my confidence. It wasn't easy, and I faced moments of frustration where I felt like giving up. But each small victory, each design that came out better than the last, was a reminder that I was capable of more than I had ever given myself credit for. It wasn't just the skills that I was learning. It was the people I was meeting along the way. The digital world, with its vast online communities and networking opportunities, opened up doors to new friendships and collaborations. I met others who were on the same journey, people who, like me, were stepping out of the corporate world to chase their passions. These connections gave me a sense of belonging, a reminder that I wasn't alone in my journey. One of the most powerful moments came when I met Anna, a fellow designer I had connected with through an online forum. She had left her corporate job years ago and had built a successful freelance business from the ground up. Her story resonated with me deeply. She had gone through the same fears and doubts I was experiencing, and she had come out stronger on the other side. Anna became a mentor to me, guiding me through the early stages of my freelance career. She helped me understand that it wasn't just about the skills you had. It was about building relationships, staying true to your values, and embracing the uncertainty of the journey. With Anna's encouragement, I took my first steps into the world of freelancing. I began taking on small projects, working with clients who valued my creativity and fresh perspective. It wasn't an overnight success, and there were many times when I felt unsure of myself. But with each project, I felt more alive. The work was challenging, yes, but it felt right. It felt like something I had been missing all along, like I was finally doing something that resonated with my soul. The financial insecurity, the doubts and the fear didn't magically disappear, but they became manageable. I learned to budget better, to invest my time and resources wisely, and most importantly, to have patience. I realized that success doesn't come in a straight line. It's a winding road full of bumps and detours. But it's the journey that matters, not the destination. I found myself waking up in the morning with a sense of purpose, something I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer just going through the motions of life. I was living it, creating it, and most importantly, I was building it on my own terms. In the end, it was the fear of staying stuck that pushed me forward. And now, I realize that stepping out of that circle, the circle of fear, of self-doubt, of living for others, was the best decision I ever made. The path wasn't easy, and I still have so much more to learn, but I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid of failure. I'm not afraid of taking risks. Because I now know that failure doesn't define me. It's just a part of the journey. I'm proud of where I am today. Not because everything is perfect, but because I finally found the courage to live a life that belongs to me. Leaving behind the life I once knew, the corporate grind, and the daily pressures was both liberating and terrifying. I didn't have everything figured out. In fact, I had barely any answers. But somehow, I had everything I needed in that moment. Hope. The very thing that had been drained from me during those exhausting years in a job that didn't speak to my soul. When I first left, everything seemed uncertain. It wasn't like in the movies where you step away from your job and immediately walk into a world of dreams. No, it wasn't that glamorous. The first few weeks felt like I was drifting, not really knowing where to go, unsure of what the future held. I had no salary to count on, no routine that I could fall back into. But what I had instead was a chance to build something real, something meaningful, something that felt right. I started small. I took on a few freelance projects, things I had always wanted to do but never had time for. At first, I wasn't sure if it would work out. Would I be able to handle the instability? Could I create something from scratch? Would I be able to sustain myself without the safety net of a steady paycheck? These were all the questions that haunted me at first. The fears were real. But as I pushed through, something remarkable happened. The joy began to seep in. I wasn't making the kind of money I used to make, and there were moments of doubt, of frustration, and fear. But I had discovered something far more valuable than money: the ability to create, the ability to feel alive in my work, to wake up every day with a sense of purpose. I was no longer working for someone else's dream. I was working for mine. I remember one project in particular. It was a small web design job for a local business, something I would have never even considered taking on before. But this time, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. The process of designing, creating something from scratch, and seeing it come to life, it filled me with a sense of pride that I had lost along the way. Even though the payment wasn't much, the satisfaction it gave me was immeasurable. As the weeks went by, I started to see the value of this new life. I wasn't tied down by the daily grind anymore, and I had the freedom to choose the work I wanted to do. I could decide what projects aligned with my values, what clients I wanted to collaborate with, and how I wanted to structure my day. There was something so liberating about it. I could sleep in if I needed to, take breaks when I felt overwhelmed, and most importantly, I could take the time to enjoy life again. The rhythm of my life became lighter. There was a new cadence to my days, more balanced, more intentional. My mornings weren't filled with anxiety, rushing through the same monotonous routine. Instead, I took time to nourish myself, both mentally and physically. I started going for walks, reading books I had set aside for years, and simply enjoying the quiet. It was a kind of peace I had been missing. I could breathe again. As I continued to work on projects I was passionate about, something even more beautiful began to unfold: connections. I started meeting like-minded people, others who had taken the same leap of faith and stepped out of the traditional job world. There was an energy in these conversations, a shared understanding that, even though our paths were uncertain, we were all walking toward something that felt more authentic, more aligned with who we were meant to be. There was no longer a rush to keep up with everyone else, no more trying to meet expectations that weren't mine to begin with. I began to understand that success is not defined by a title or a paycheck. It's defined by how you feel about the work you're doing and the life you're living. And I realized that what I was building now had a foundation rooted in my true self, something that couldn't be shaken by external pressures. I learned to embrace the uncertainty, the fear of instability, the anxiety of not knowing where the next paycheck would come from. It was still there, lurking in the back of my mind. But it was no longer paralyzing. I had learned to be comfortable with not knowing everything, with the unpredictable nature of life. Because with that uncertainty came the possibility of something greater, something far more fulfilling than what I had left behind. I started to rediscover the parts of myself I had lost over the years. The creativity, the curiosity, the drive to create something meaningful. And with this rediscovery came a sense of empowerment. I had given myself the permission to be imperfect, to take risks, to fail, and to keep going. It wasn't always easy, but it was real, and that made all the difference. And slowly but surely, I started to see the rewards of my decision. Not just in terms of money, but in terms of the joy and fulfillment I was experiencing. The more I embraced this new life, the more I found that opportunities came to me. I started to attract the kind of clients I wanted to work with, and I began to realize that the world had far more possibilities than I had ever imagined when I was locked in that corporate cage. The rhythm of my life became more aligned with who I was. I was no longer chasing deadlines that meant nothing to me. I was no longer working for a paycheck that didn't reflect my worth. I was no longer sacrificing my happiness for the approval of others. I was living my own truth, and it felt good. In this new chapter, I had more space to grow, more space to explore, and most importantly, more space to be myself. And while there were still challenges, there was no turning back. The rewards of stepping out of that circle, the corporate world that once defined me, were worth every ounce of fear I had felt before. Today, my life has a rhythm that feels natural. It's a life filled with hope, possibility, and joy. I've created a future that speaks to who I am, not who I was told to be. And while the journey isn't always easy, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I've learned that stepping out of the circle wasn't a loss. It was the beginning of something new, something real, and something worth fighting for. If you're feeling lost, confused, or overwhelmed, know this: you are not alone. At some point in our lives, most of us will find ourselves standing at a crossroads, unsure of which way to turn. It happens to all of us, whether in our 20s, 30s, or beyond. This is the time in life when we start asking ourselves the bigger questions. Am I truly happy? Is this the life I imagined? Did I choose the right path? If you're in your 30s, maybe you've been following a script for years, a script that society handed you when you were young. Get a good job, climb the corporate ladder, buy a house, get married, have kids. For some, this is the dream. But for others, this script feels like a suffocating mask. At some point, you realize it's not your own dream you've been chasing. You've been chasing someone else's. And now, standing in your own shoes, you're wondering if there's more to life than this. If you're questioning everything, know that you are not broken. It's not that you've failed or that something is wrong with you. You are simply coming face to face with the truth of who you really are and what you truly want. And that, my dear friend, is something to be proud of. At 30 plus, we have earned the right to ask the big questions. You have the right to evaluate what you've built and ask yourself if it truly brings you joy. You have the right to step back and say, is this life really mine? Is this the life I want to continue living? It's okay to feel tired, to feel uncertain, to feel like you've hit a wall. I get it. We've been taught that we must keep pushing forward, that we must keep striving for success, that rest is a luxury we can't afford. But the truth is, rest is essential. Not just physical rest, but mental rest. It's okay to take a break from the constant pressure, to step away from the noise and give yourself permission to just be. I want you to know this. You are allowed to start over. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to redefine your success and find peace with your choices. Your life is not a race, and it's never too late to make changes. The only failure is to stop trying to build a life that aligns with who you are. If you feel stuck, ask yourself this: what would it feel like to live a life that feels authentic to me? And then, take a deep breath and start moving toward it. Even if it's one small step at a time, I understand how daunting it can be. We often fear that if we change paths, we'll be seen as failures. But in reality, it's the opposite. It takes so much courage to listen to your inner voice, to recognize when you need a change, and to take action. You are not alone in this. There are so many of us walking this uncertain road, searching for something more, something that feels like home. Remember this: you do not have to have everything figured out. You do not need to have all the answers right now. Life is a journey, and there's no need to rush. Sometimes we need to slow down, take a step back, and allow ourselves the space to breathe, to feel, and to rediscover what truly matters. If you're tired, it's okay to rest. If you're confused, it's okay to take your time. It's okay to not have it all figured out. There is no deadline to find your path. Life is not a race. It's a journey, and every step you take, no matter how small, is a victory in itself. To anyone who is feeling lost, overwhelmed, or afraid to take that leap, you are not alone. We are all in this together. We all have our moments of doubt. But please, don't give up on yourself. Don't let fear keep you from living the life you deserve. You are worth more than the life you've been told to live. You are worthy of a life that fills you with joy, purpose, and meaning. So, take a breath. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to reset. You are allowed to ask yourself, what do I really want? And know that you have the strength within you to create the life you've always dreamed of. It's not about perfection. It's about being true to yourself. And that is the most beautiful thing you can ever do. You're not lost. You're simply in the process of finding yourself. To anyone who feels lost, stuck, or overwhelmed, I want to begin by telling you something you might need to hear today. Don't be afraid to start over, because the truth is, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience, and that experience is invaluable. I understand the exhaustion that comes with life's relentless demands, the pressure to keep pushing forward, to always be on top of things, to constantly perform. It's a lot to carry. We live in a world that often tells us, you're only as good as your last achievement, and it can feel like we're constantly racing against time. But here's the thing. You are so much more than your accomplishments. If you've been feeling like you're running on empty, I want you to know you're not alone. It's okay to feel tired. It's okay to feel like you're running out of energy, out of motivation. It's okay to look at your life and wonder, is this it? Is this all there is? Sometimes, all we need is a moment of pause, a moment to reflect and reassess, to ask ourselves what we truly want and need. The exhaustion we feel isn't just physical, it's emotional too. We carry the weight of expectations, our own, our families, societies, and it can be overwhelming. You may find yourself at a point where you're not sure whether you're living your life for yourself or for everyone else. And that's okay. That's part of the human experience. But here's what I want to say to you, with all the sincerity I can muster. You don't have to keep living this way. There is a different path, one that allows you to be true to yourself. The journey to get there might be long and it might be uncertain, but it is so worth it. If you're feeling stuck, remember, you are not stuck forever. Life is full of possibilities, and it's never too late to change direction. There's a quote I love. It's never too late to be what you might have been. That doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out, but it does mean that you have the power to decide when you want to change. When you want to step into a new version of yourself, you don't need permission from anyone to reinvent yourself. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment. The time to start is now, even if it's with just one small step. Small changes lead to big transformations. You don't have to transform your whole life overnight. Start with something small, something that makes you feel alive again, something that reminds you of who you really are and what you really want. And when you do, be kind to yourself. Don't judge yourself for feeling tired or for questioning the life you've built so far. Those feelings don't make you weak. They make you human. They make you someone who is brave enough to look inward, to question what truly matters, and to want more for yourself. That takes courage. So be proud of that courage. I know it's hard. I know it feels easier to just keep going with the flow, to stick with what's familiar, even if it's not making you happy. But I promise you, there is so much more on the other side of this fear, the other side of this doubt. If you're feeling exhausted, please, take a moment to rest. Take a moment to step back and reflect. You don't need to have everything figured out right now. Life isn't a race, it's a journey, and it's okay to take your time. You have the right to change, to evolve, and to start fresh. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's one of the most powerful decisions you can make. When you choose to put yourself first, when you choose to live a life that truly reflects who you are, you will find a peace that you may have forgotten was possible. And to those of you who are still unsure, still wondering, but what if I fail? I want to tell you this. There's no such thing as failure unless you give up on yourself. Even the most difficult journeys, the ones that seem like mistakes at the time, have valuable lessons. You will grow, you will learn, and you will become a version of yourself that you never thought possible. So, to all of you who are tired, lost, or unsure of the future, please hear me when I say this. You are not alone. We are all figuring it out as we go. It's okay to feel tired. It's okay to take a step back. But remember, don't stay there too long. There is a version of you out there waiting to be rediscovered. And when you find that version of yourself, when you start living the life that truly belongs to you, it will be worth every step of the journey. Thank you for listening today. Know that I am with you on this path. You are not alone. And whatever you choose to do next, remember, you are enough. Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to Sweet Love Stories. I'm so happy to have you here with us today. Whether you're watching with your morning coffee or winding down after a long day, we're sending you all the love and wishing you a peaceful, lucky, and fulfilling day ahead. Here on Sweet Love Stories, we don't just talk about romance. We talk about real life, raw emotions, and the beautiful messiness of being human. Today, we're diving into part 2 of our special series, Confessions in Your 30s, and trust me, this one hits close to home. Our guest today is a woman who once thought she had it all: success, stability, recognition. But one morning, she woke up and realized something was missing. Happiness, purpose, herself. What happens when the career you built no longer feels like you? When the life you dreamed of starts feeling like a cage? Stay with us, because this is not just a story. It's a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a little piece of yourself in her words. Let's begin. Hi. Before I say anything else, I want to thank you for being here, for choosing to listen. My name is Claire. I'm 36 years old, and on paper, I've had what many would call a successful career. I work in corporate marketing. I've been in the industry for over 12 years. I climbed the ladder. I earned titles, bonuses, and respect. I used to walk into meetings with confidence. I used to believe I was building something that mattered. But today, I feel like I'm quietly unraveling. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at your life and thought, I should be happy, but I'm not? That question haunts me. And I think it haunts more of us than we dare to admit. Because here's the truth. No one tells you when you're young and chasing goals. Success doesn't always feel like fulfillment. Sometimes it just feels heavy. I remember being in my 20s, wide-eyed and ambitious. I wanted to prove myself. I said yes to everything. I stayed late, came in early, worked weekends. I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor. I thought burnout meant I was doing something right. And it worked. For a while. I got promoted. I became a rising star. People said they admired my drive. My LinkedIn looked shiny. My Instagram had pictures of business trips and brunches. From the outside, I was thriving. But inside, I started to feel this strange, growing emptiness. It was subtle at first. I'd wake up and immediately feel tired. I'd stare at my computer and feel numb. I'd sit in meetings and wonder, what are we even talking about? What does this even mean? But I kept going. Because that's what we're taught, right? Keep pushing, keep proving, keep performing, until one morning, I sat in my car outside the office, hands on the steering wheel, unable to move. I couldn't go in. I didn't have the energy to put on the smile, wear the mask, play the role. I cried, right there in the parking lot. Not because something terrible had happened, but because nothing had, and I still felt like I was drowning. I started to ask myself hard questions. Is this it? Is this what I worked so hard for? Is this the life I'm going to live for the next 20 years? But those questions terrified me. Because if the answer was no, then what was I doing with my life? And if the answer was yes, then why did I feel so lost? I used to love my work. Truly. I used to get excited about campaigns, about strategy, about storytelling. But somewhere, along the way, that passion turned into pressure. Creativity turned into KPI stress. Connection turned into competition. And joy turned into just survival. The hardest part? No one knew. Because I was still performing, still showing up, still delivering results, still being the strong one. People looked at me and said, "You're so lucky." And I smiled. But inside, I felt like I was vanishing. There's a kind of loneliness that comes when you're surrounded by people, but feel unseen. When you're celebrated for a version of yourself that no longer exists. That's where I've been. And maybe that's where you are too. It's not that I'm ungrateful. I know I've been fortunate. I've had mentors, opportunities, a stable income, things many people long for. But, can I be honest? Gratitude and grief can exist in the same heart. I can be thankful for the life I built, and still mourn the parts of myself I lost along the way. I miss the version of me who used to dream wildly, who wanted to write, to travel, to create. I miss the version of me who laughed without guilt, who didn't measure her worth by productivity, who believed that happiness wasn't something you earned. It was something you chose. And I think what breaks me the most is realizing I gave so much of myself to become someone I'm not even sure I want to be anymore. So here I am, standing at a crossroads. I don't have the answers yet. I haven't figured out what's next. But I know this. I can't keep living a life that doesn't feel like mine. And maybe this moment, this tired, tearful, trembling moment, isn't a breakdown. Maybe it's a beginning. I wanted to share this, not because I have some inspirational ending, not because I've already made the leap, or because I know how to fix it, but because I think we need more spaces where people can say, I'm not okay, without shame. Because this idea that we need to have everything figured out by 30 is a lie. This pressure to succeed, to settle down, to know who you are, it's crushing people. Quietly, invisibly, and I don't want to pretend anymore. If you're listening right now and something inside you whispers, yes, I know that feeling, then this story is for you. Not to give you answers, but to remind you, you are not alone. There is nothing wrong with you for wanting more. There is nothing weak about walking away from something that doesn't make your soul light up. And there is no shame in starting over. So this is me. Not the version you'd see in a polished resume or on a curated Instagram feed. This is me, Claire, 36, tired, questioning, but still hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we can build a life not just filled with achievement, but with meaning. And that starts, I think, with telling the truth. Even when it shakes. Even when it's messy. Even when we don't know what comes next. Thank you for listening. And if you're... So, how did I end up here? Sometimes I ask myself that exact question when I'm 3 coffees deep on a Monday morning, staring at another 45-slide presentation, wondering if this was really the plan all along. But the truth is, I didn't fall into this career. I ran toward it, fast, head first, with a bright, burning fire of ambition, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny dose of naivety. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a family where stability was the